Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today with Project Muse, Improving Outcomes for Multilingual Students with Exceptional Needs. We are a special education resource lead for all English learners in support of our system of support. This project is funded by the California Department of Education, CDE, and the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, CCEE, and brought to you and hosted by Imperial County SELPA. We're absolutely honored to be able to share in this work with you. So we'll get started as we enter session 5, System Improvement, Equity, and Access for Dually Identified Students. I'll be your presenter for today. I'm Dr. Deborah Montoya. And our toolkit, you may have missed some sessions prior to, but they are all recorded. So this is session 5, and there's one more session to go. So thank you. You've been joining our series all along the way. So as we focus today on a highlighted resource regarding our students who are dually identified, I wanted to share a little bit with you about what we do. So this may be your first time joining our session. We are special education resource leads in partnership with CDE and CCEE, collaboratively working throughout the system of support to improve outcomes for all students with disabilities. My esteemed colleagues are joining me here today in this session. I have the honor and privilege to be a consultant for our team. Cristina Zavala, Lupita Lin Rubio, and Vanessa Lopez truly are honoring and carrying on the work throughout the state in support of all dually identified students. So, as a system of support comprised of state funded allies and friends, colleagues and resources, we work together as practitioners in collaboration, bringing together much needed resources in support of you, the practitioner, whether you're a special educator, general educator, English learner coordinator, support provider, maybe you're a principal, ed specialist, all of us coming together in support of our students, bringing together different projects. So you may see on this screen a project that you're familiar with. Again, our area is English Learners, Imperial SELPA, on the very, very southeast corner of California. And we do this work specifically in support of you. We understand that identification of English learners throughout your multi-tiered system of support, identifying what your pre-referral and referral practices are, assessment, ensuring culturally and linguistically appropriate assessments for those English learners that do qualify for special education. How do we develop appropriate IEPs, educational programs, and instruction? And then reclassification. We know that's a hot topic in California as well, as we want to ensure best practices across the state. But our greater why, and that's what we want to share with you today, is this understanding and identification that there are students across California that are identified as English learners. We also understand that Spanish being a predominant language of many of our students with disabilities, specifically in California, and wanting to align supports and services. Also, recognition that there are students across our state who have fallen at risk or have become long-term English learners, and asking the greater questions of why. What do supports and services look like for our English learners in support of their English language acquisition skills and in support of their rigorous exposure to challenging standards and having success for all students? We look at a comparison here of English learner data and English learners with disabilities, our dually identified students. Acknowledging also that we want to support our students' English language acquisition skills so that they have an opportunity to be reclassified as fluent English proficient students. What does that process and progress look like? You may also already start thinking about what are your LP scores, your English language proficiency indicator scores in special education. So there may be many of you participating today who are special educators, special education directors, ed specialists, etc., who are thinking about your special education data specifically, where you recognize that there are students in special education who are English learners that are dually identified, wanting to understand what are the unique needs of your respective students in your district. Across the state, what has been noted is there is an increasing number of students who are identified as English learners who qualify for special education support and services under the primary disability of speech of specific learning disability, speech language impairment, and autism as the top three categories of identified dually identified students. So you may be wondering what your data looks like. How might your top three align, and what supports uniquely look like for your students? Our grounding resource that we look to as a grant is the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities. We also know that this is a very robust document, and you may have begun the journey in looking into this document, and we've been providing infographics and resources related to this document in search of best practices, alignment of practices, so that we all have a common language in supporting equitably our English learners with disabilities. However, today, our focal resource you see here, our infographic, session 5 of our toolkit. This is created as a resource guide for effective practices for identifying the needs of English learners and English learners with disabilities. Many of you are engaged in systems improvement work and assuring equitable and appropriate systems for our students, enhancing our own practices, and enhancing the service and support to our students. So, this focal resource, I'll be coming back to it and sharing resources that are also hyperlinked within it. In the creation of this particular resource, you may have been like me. I was thinking about how do we support our system as a whole? How do we leverage our respective expertise as special educators, support providers of English learners? And again, your own expertise may be in special education and maybe in the world of EL. And how do we work together to leverage support? You may be in a district that's also working collaboratively through differentiated assistance, comprehensive support and improvement, ATSI or additional targeted support, and the processes required thereof. I'll also share a little bit about the overlaps and the linkages with LCAP. This is also LCAP season for many of you. You may also be thinking about a SIM plan. Perhaps you just created that SIM plan and also are trying to find how can we work together on these goals amongst systems in support of our dually identified students. And I continue to share this because this is work for multidisciplinary teams. As multidisciplinary teams, we are charged with ensuring that our systems are working in collaboration, continuously working to improve outcomes for our students. So let's delve into this particular resource. The Systems Improvement for Equity and Access for English Learners with Disabilities is a resource to support, perhaps to depersonalize in a group as you work with collaborative support networks, or you're thinking about who can engage with me in this work. Have I established those relationships and partnerships with other experts within your system, whether you are working at school site, within a larger district, maybe a SELPA or county office, and working in collaboration. So we'll start with systems improvement from the lens of identifying who are our students. The resource takes you through identification of a greater understanding and building common questions together of whom are our English learners? What is the data that's available to you? Do you have access to all of the data points that help you establish a true comprehensive understanding of whom are all of our students? Who are your students with disabilities? Who are your students who are dually identified, students with disabilities, who are also English learners? What does that data look like? Perhaps you're a data that's also identifying through differentiated assistance, acknowledging also your dashboard. Perhaps it's a subgroup of English learners and the subgroup of students with disabilities. And working through how do I support each? Understand that all students with disabilities are general education students first. So as we think of tier 1 core instruction, given the data that we have, we could first ask, how are we working in support of our English learners, our students who are identified as needing additional support, core instruction for English learners in general education environments? And then we layer and ask questions about our students with disabilities and then our English learners with disabilities. So there is Given the data, what do you notice? So, as with all of our toolkit sessions, you will have homework after this. Your entry point will be different depending on the needs of your students, your respective system, and where your starting point is. So, you may want to start with identifying your ELP data, grade level, by student, by disability. What does that information provide? Perhaps that is your wheelhouse. As an EL expert, you're going to start with your EL data. And then in partnership with your special education leaders, directors, support providers in your district, gathering data from your special education information system, perhaps together looking at your CASP assessment data, accommodations provided to students through CASP assessment data. Where is all of that data housed, and how are we looking at it from a lens of supports for English learners, students with disabilities, and dually identified students? This particular resource may look very familiar to you as you're thinking about continuous improvement resources, because there also are overlaps. Thinking about our students who are dually identified, all of our students, wishing them success, cradle to career, safe, engagement, supported, challenge, and healthy environments. We look to basic services and we can start there. Again, recognizing that all English learners are general education students, all students with disabilities are general education students. And what does basic services look like? Access to state standards, course access. When we think about that in conjunction with student achievement, we can also then focus on our 8 state priorities. As we think about our 8 state priorities and our conditions of learning, what have student outcomes been in your district, in your school site? These are the deeper questions that you're asking amongst teams. So, although you may be participating alone today, this is the work that you would then take forward with your respective schools and or school districts. A great place to start would be reviewing your policy versus your practice. We can have great policies, written and unwritten, and also thinking about the data both qualitatively and quantitatively, acknowledging what is our actual practice at our given school site. If you're a multi-district county office, a SELPA, or you're thinking of it as a district, and is there calibration amongst the school sites within my district? So that might be a good place to start, given the LEA's existing policies, reviewing what is occurring in practice. So in actuality, in the actual site, what is occurring? What does student performance look like in the classroom? When you're thinking about your observations of what does comprehensive ELD look like? What interim and benchmark data is available? Perhaps service logs when we consider the actual service provision for students with disabilities who are English learners. What does the quality of service look like? What is the quantity of service? How were those IEPs developed in respect to the student's unique disability and also their needs as a multilingual learner? So on the side here, you'll see 4 aspects. This particular resource also has several links embedded. Reviewing access to basic services, implementation of Common Core state standards. What is core access for your students? The next prong is reviewing how the LEA, your district and schools, engage together and gather input from educational partners. So have you leaned into the system of support? Perhaps that's your next step. Perhaps your next step is reaching out to us as technical support providers in giving you greater insights and support as you delve within this data in regards to supports for dually identified students. Likewise, review of access to instruction. So very important as we think about what is quality instruction for our dually identified students. What are access points? When we think about accommodations, access, and consistency to the implementation of accommodations, designated supports, universal tools. And then lastly, uniquely looking at special education supports and services for our dually identified students. Are we equally collaborating together to assure that our students who are multilingual learners with disabilities, that When still identified as an English learner, they retain comprehensive ELD services, both integrated and designated, to support their English language acquisition and, of course, to support their needs as a student with a disability. So there's a lot of information in this particular section of the resource. So I wanted to give you a moment to click on resources that you feel like maybe you want to have on your desktop that you want to keep. So let's give you just a quick about 6 minutes to give you an opportunity to access the resource if you haven't already. You may have joined late and haven't looked at the infographic itself and need some time to peruse some of the links. So I'm going to set a timer for 6 minutes. And at the same time, I'm going to take a look at the chat real quick. Time's up. So you may have had an opportunity to click on a resource that you gravitated to most. Maybe it was the LPAC accessibility checklist. Perhaps it was the CAS matrix in itself. Perhaps it was the framework. As you're considering all of the resources that are available to you, oftentimes it is difficult to make the connections. I have this overwhelmingly amount of data. What do I do with the data? What does the data mean in respect to the students whom I serve in my respective district and or school site? And that's where we get into making some sense of that data and identifying from a root cause analysis process where there are perhaps gaps in practice. I know we also sometimes use the term problems of practice. And upon further examination, the district or school site might also want to delve into what are our tiers of support and what exists within our tiers of support. Sometimes when we look at tiers in and of themselves, it gives us a different picture. That quantitative and qualitative data takes on a whole new view. Our vision of what supports are lacking, needed, and are necessary may come to fruition as teams, because that's the important part is the teams having the conversation. In the examination of the work, of course, what are positive practices? What are the practices that we continue to uplift for our English learners and English learners with disabilities? While again, identifying those gaps in practice and where we can lean in as a system of support. In tier one, there's an infographic also, and you may have joined prior sessions where you had an opportunity to explore the tier one, tier two, and tier three infographics in respect again to best practice as they relate to our English learners. In addition, you may have already looked at your data and you're at a point where you want to further examine that data and are asking some very deep questions about academic achievement, both English language arts, mathematics, identifying are we operating sound ELD programs? What does designated ELD look like for our students? Some great partners that exist within our system of support. The EL Rise EL Learner Roadmap implementation resources are excellent. The toolkits, if you haven't explored them. And the system improvement leads have created a wonderful root cause analysis guide. That particular guide can help you as you identify concerns, problems of practice, and perhaps again need a set of questions to get you through that conversation of the interrelatedness of all of this data. Here's a snapshot of the root cause analysis inquiry guide. The link is also active through the slide deck, and perhaps you gravitate quickly to root cause analysis as it relates to indicator 3, student achievement. Perhaps you gravitate quickly to indicator 5 where it's 3 and 5. I'm looking at my achievement and I'm looking at my LRE data. Where's that relationship? Have we looked at that relationship? What have our conversations been in relation to assuring least restrictive environment and academic achievement? Have we had the conversation in context to our duly identified students? And that's where the deeper conversations and the hard work really exists. Because many times what we find is that we're having conversations about access to courses, student achievement, parent involvement, student engagement in respect to the needs of our students whom are English learners, and then separate conversations in respect to our students who are students with disabilities, And now we have this opportunity to come together and identify what are the needs of our dually identified students. Have we taken that local data and drilled down even further? As we look at both subgroups on our California dashboard, what do we see and what do we notice about commonalities? As we then look at our English learner progress indicator information, because progress is progress made. I know many times our questions are related to how do we get to reclass a little bit faster? And we shape our language to be how can we support our students to demonstrate progress? That our students are truly, fully learning English language acquisition skills, constructs, success in now it is English, their second language, and assuring again that students are meeting these indicators of progress and then truly being able to be reclassified. So, as we look at the data that's available to us and we're working through all of these systems of support, you may be a special educator where this is your wheelhouse, where we're looking at compliance and improvement monitoring, our process data and information. Also, we talk about, we have all of these acronyms in special education, annual performance report, our state performance plan indicators. Here's just a sample of one. I do have highlighted there where the dashboard data comes into play. The rest of the data extracted and pulled from your respective IEPs in the special education information system that you use for your respective district. The targets are very different in special education. So, as we know, on the general ed side of the house, on the dashboard, we are able to see rate and change and the colors different, like looking like cellular towers. In special education, unfortunately, target is met yes or no. Some of the indicators like LRE data, it's a moving target, so it's important to also know from our perspective and looking at all of our data where growth has been made and identifying how growth has been made. What are our next steps towards growth? Many of you have already written a SIM plan, a compliance improvement plan for your respective district. And now you're having conversations in LCAP meetings or perhaps DA or ATSI, and also leveraging all of this data and finding those commonalities because many of the students whom we serve are falling into these multiple brackets and wanting to understand what does the day in the life of this student look like on our campus? What does course access look like? What does student engagement look like? What's parent involvement and engagement look like? So as we identify the needs of our dually identified students, all of this data is important for us to examine, to look at. The California Department of Education created a wonderful three-way crosswalk some time ago, and I would be remiss to not highlight it. The three-way crosswalk takes into consideration the LCAP priorities, the EL roadmap principles, and the special education indicators. Fantastic resource, as again, we bring together our respective knowledge and expertise as we engage in-depth root cause analysis process. Well, what we hope is in-depth root cause analysis, because I also recognize that time, time is very hard for many of us to all get together at the table and take that time to delve into our data. And the big why, we want to have the most positive impact for our students, looking at high leverage practices, planning for, and the implementation, because success of our students is also success of our staff. Part of this process may also be looking at from the practitioner's lens. How are we supporting all of our practitioners? Perhaps that's your next starting point as you look at the EL roadmap principles and you consider the ELD standards. How have we supported our educators, our staff, our teachers in uplifting the ELD standards and understanding the depth and complexity of those ELD standards and the ELA frameworks? When we think from special education, assuring again that our students are receiving supports that are unique to their needs as a student with disability without losing sight of their needs as an English learner. So the three-way crosswalk is on this next slide. You do have the link to it as well. And that might be a starting point as you're also considering what goals have we developed in our SIM plan. And now, as we look at LCAP and LCAP strategies, planning, and priorities, as we know, many of our students with disabilities fall into our prongs of also being socioeconomic disadvantage, perhaps also foster youth, and then perhaps also students whom are English learners. As we take all of these metrics into consideration, this might be the next tool that you delve into as you're acknowledging where are our bright spots as well as where are gaps in practices. Many of us, like me in my respective districts, we're looking at least restrictive environment. All priorities are important, all principles are important, and yet as a team, we're developing goals to identify strategically which high leverage practices, what supports, what's needed and necessary from staff development to student outcomes and everything in between, as we want to assure that our students are having meaningful access and opportunities with their non-disabled peers. So as you look at all of these metrics and look at the crosswalk, your priority areas may be very different than your neighboring school district, depending on your data. What does your data say about your system and the supports that are most needed by your students? Because we absolutely have commonalities. If you're an EL expert or a special education expert, we absolutely have opportunities of overlap. When we think about meaningful access and least restrictive environment, from the perspective of English learners, the California EL Roadmap vision, fully and meaningful access. That's what we want for our English learners to have meaningful access, participating in mastery of grade level standards, opportunities to develop proficiency, absolutes for our students who are English learners, wanting to achieve and strive to achieve. We have that moral imperative to assure that our students have the opportunities they need to be successful. And likewise, as we think of our English learners and our dually identified students, English learners with disabilities, ensuring that there is receipt of comprehensive ELD. In California, that includes both integrated and designated ELD. I know we share this probably during every single session, but it is so important. As we think about what does that look like for our students as we support their progress, assuring that special education is not in lieu of designated, that all of our students, whether students with very mild or extensive support needs, as an English learner with a disability, ensuring access. That's a basic core access. Tier one, that designated ELD is part of everyday instruction, as well, of course, as integrated ELD. So as you think of your systems, that might be your starting point of having conversations with your teachers. What does designated ELD look like? Is there protected space and minutes for instruction where those ELD standards are focal for all English learners, including English learners with disabilities? And uniquely for our students with disabilities, meaningful access in the least restrictive environment to the maximum extent appropriate for our students with disabilities to have those opportunities. So as we think about designated ELD, what better place to start than to consider as a gen ed student first, as an English learner, that designated ELD, that opportunity is afforded alongside other English learners who are also acquiring the language, who also need supports, who need designated supports, and for our students with disabilities, perhaps with accommodations. That will be the access point for the student to participate along non-disabled peers in designated ELD. So as you think again about all of our students with disabilities, our dually identified students specifically, where is designated ELD being provided and how is it being provided? Is it accessible? When we then move from instruction to assessment, is the assessment accessible? Have we taken the time to look at each of those IEPs for our dually identified students or query? Again, gathering that quantitative and qualitative data, investigating through our ed specialists. What do accommodations look like for our English learner with a disability? Is that LPAC accessible? Are students able to truly show what they know through that assessment process? All of these markers of data are important, and to ask the questions, to have a thorough understanding of what is our practice. And as California practitioners across the state, how do we leverage that knowledge and information? As we explicitly monitor the data related to each implemented strategy, so you may have already existing LCAP goals that you're monitoring now. Perhaps this is the time to also tweak some of those goals. Maybe that's the process that you're in as a respective district. Perhaps as a school site, you're sharing your data with the district as what your qualitative and quantitative looks like, unique to your school community. Because we also acknowledge that each respective school has a different dynamic, has data unique in and to itself, and may have different challenges as well as positive practices that can be shared. Our best practices are always revisited to ensure the continuation of that service and support. So, what does consistency look like over years? We may have had a wonderful practice that matched our policy, but does it continue to be implemented with consistency and fidelity? Are we upholding all of the state and federal mandates in relation to both English learners as well as students with disabilities? This is where perhaps our EL experts are starting to also think about what did our FPM process look like recently? When that FPM protocol and we started to look at where are our students with disabilities receiving designated ELD? What was your response at that time? Was that an opportunity then to engage with your special education director or special education coordinator about how can we work together to ensure that all students with disabilities are receiving designated ELD? Likewise, we may have said, yes, all students with disabilities are receiving designated ELD. And now we have deeper questions about what is the quality of that service? How can we support the teacher in assuring that students are gaining English language acquisition skills, that we're seeing progress from year to year that impacts then our LP score? So, your entry point and how do we know when we're making progress differs. It truly differs. Your goals are going to be unique based on the data that you've gathered. This particular infographic, what I hope, will be a resource to you to have those questions available to you, to know which resources you can utilize as supportive tools through the root cause analysis process and the development of your goals, as well as implementation. So the resource in and of itself can help us as a system look at our big why, what does the data say, and to ground us as together we work on the true purpose of our educational system to assure that all students, every student, is afforded with opportunities as a unique person as they are to have their needs met and to enable each of our students to develop to their own potential. And I know that's a very difficult task because our students are so unique. Even within each respective disability category, our students are individuals. Our English learner population, individuals. So the more we dig into our data, drill down into our respective data, the more we'll know about our communities. So, as critical partners in this work, I want you to reflect on where will you get started? What data points are you going to uplift and highlight as a member of your multidisciplinary team? Where will you get started in this system improvement work as you identify the data? Who are English learners? Who are students with disabilities? And who are our dually identified students? As you review that data, identifying what are the resources available, what does the data tell us as we step back and look at all of the pieces of data? What are the relationships in that data? What are the questions still left to be unasked as a team? Again, with our collective efforts, examining that data, identifying the data, re-looking at existing goals. Perhaps that examination again leads us to new goals for then the process of implementation. What does implementation look like in your respective school site or district? And what will be your iterative process of monitoring? Because it doesn't stop. We're constantly monitoring our data as we have new students, students who do reclass. We then look at our new existing students and how we provide our supports and structures to all of our students. In so doing, we also acknowledge that the system improvement work is not only iterative, but it is expansive. We constantly learn new supports, new resources, new colleagues and allies. And that's what we hope to be for you at Imperial County SELPA through this grant work, is another support to you as you ask these questions and want to learn more about the intersectionality and the supportive structures for positive outcomes of our English learners with disabilities. And how we do this work is as capacity builders, connectors, and facilitators. All it takes is an email, a phone call, a reach out, your information in the chat box. If you feel that this is the work that needs to be done, you're ready as crucial partners in this important work. Perhaps you need, again, the lens and support of others. That is the work that we do. Providing level 1 supports, professional development, and technical assistance. Level 2 supports, providing customized professional development and TA. So helping you dig into the data, if you will, that we shared today as questions and talking points. Whereas at level 3, then looking at this intersectionality of all of the information, as again, you may be a district who's working through SIM processes, ATSI, and significant disproportionality. Wherever your needs are, we hope that you have found a resource that you can also add to your resource bank, because it is a team lift approach. We share this with you often because it is not work that can be done in silos. We know the outcome of that. That when we work in silos as EL experts and as special educators, we're not having those deeper conversations about how to support our dually identified students. It leaves a piece out of the mix of the true work to be done as we look at high leverage practices, and we lean in together on leveraging our expertise. That's really what our practitioners need of us, our staff needs of us, and our students need of us as we look together at common goals and providing support. Another great resource across California are your region English learner specialists. So the English learner specialists exist throughout California. You can see the map here. That might be another resource that as you're looking at greater supports in relation to the service for our English learners, and again, are dually identified as we work closely with our RELs, to use the acronym, that might be your next support structure as well, as they uniquely work through all things Title III, supports resources for you out in the field as we engage together in this work. You may have engaged in other toolkits. This session is being recorded and you can utilize it, share it as you like. The same as the slides, you can share and reuse any of the slides that you felt were pertinent and important to the work that you're doing in your respective district. If you missed any of the sessions, they are recorded, and there's one more session in this series on the 8th of May. So we encourage you to continue to attend, to continue to engage with us. A tiered approach of accessibility might be your next step as you consider again how our students fully supported and fully engaging and being able to show mastery of content, showing what they know, and supported again by their service providers. We also have great resources on demand, self-paced, professional development on Canvas. Absolutely, these resources are free to you to be used as you see appropriate within your respective school or district. We want to thank you for your collective commitment. Ensuring academic success, linguistic progress, and social emotional well-being of our English learners with disabilities, it is a shared responsibility. We cannot emphasize this enough as we think about student engagement, staff partnerships, partnerships with parents and families, as we work together to assure educational equity, that we're providing our students with the utmost needs, seeing them for who they are, what their needs are, and working together as supportive structures so that all of our students get what they need and become successful individuals. As we work together, we hope that if you're here in isolation, that you reach out to that expert, whether you're an EL expert reaching out to a special educator, if you're a special educator reaching out to an EL expert. Building those collaborative relationships is so important. And we're here to assist you with doing that as well. Your feedback's very important to us, so I'm going to pause. I'm going to check the chat to make sure if there are any questions. Please do complete our survey. Today was just a snippet of one infographic that you might use as your next tool in your systems improvement work. So again, we appreciate your time here and engaging in this session. Please complete the survey before you log out. I'll pause a little bit if you haven't clicked on the QR. And with that, I'm going to check the chat box. I don't know if we wanted to stop the recording now, Miss Vanessa, or if we continue.